Hi, and welcome to this live reading from The Promised Plan by Sharon Hughson, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. The Master Plan. The room tilted, throwing Ruth Glenn against the doorway. She slumped, panting and blinking against the cool wood while her fingernails dug into the molding. How she despised the weakness of her flesh. I have things to do, Lord, important things. The dark spots faded, and her stomach stopped flopping like a beached fish. She took a tentative step toward her desk. Before cancer, she managed the post-surgery ward at a prominent hospital. Now, she couldn't walk from the kitchen to her bedroom without stopping for a break. No matter what her body said, she refused to give up. Not when she had formulated a plan to fix the rift between her daughters. She needed to act on it. Today. My girls need to reconnect, Lord, because she feared they would need to lean on each other all too soon. She white-knuckled the back of her office chair, carefully spinning it before collapsing onto its padded seat. She scooted close to her computer, letting her hands manipulate the mouse so she could check the reservation site. Thank the Lord for wheels. Maybe she should use this chair to get around the house. Except that reminded her too much of a wheelchair and being an invalid. She wouldn't go there. Not as long as her legs could carry her from room to room. A photo of her and her husband Dale standing by a sign in Mount Rainier National Park smiled from her computer screen. She loved the Pacific Northwest, had lived there her entire life, and still hadn't seen all its beautiful spots. Likely wouldn't see them. She clicked the icon for her vacation club, banishing the memory of her travels. Remembering conjured too much pity over everything this disease had taken from her. Lord willing, there would be time for one more trip. The club's reservation calendar went out 13 months. With the girls' busy schedules, she'd need to give them plenty of notice. She selected dates which would hold the condo for 24 hours. Time to make 2 phone calls. It would be simple enough to call Lacey. They spoke every Saturday without fail. If she didn't call by 10, Lacey would phone her. Lacey. Ruth scanned the wall of photographs in front of her. She located the black and white photo of her daughters wearing matching Easter dresses. Her girls, always so different. Getting Lacey to comb her hair and put on a dress often required threats and bribery, while Krista could sit for hours as someone rolled her hair into curlers. Ruth's eyes slid shut. She pictured her towel-headed girls rushing through the churchyard with their Easter baskets, so competitive. Sometimes Krista even beat out her bossy older sister. Their arguments and laughter echoed through the years. No matter how much fighting or fussing or competing they did, the girls always stood together when opposition came. Except this time. Her cancer wasn't the cause of their division, was it? A sigh pressed through her chapped lips. Whatever had driven a wedge between them couldn't be permanent. She would do everything in her power to remove it. She picked up the landline. Her grandsons assured her such a thing was going the way of the dinosaurs. A chuckle escaped her at the recollection of that conversation. Never a dull moment with those boys. After the third ring, Lacey answered. Good morning, Mom. How are you feeling today? Ruth despised that question. In her opinion, only old people seeking sympathy talked about their health woes. These days, everyone asked about her health while she stubbornly refused to dwell on it. She sighed. I'm tired. Merci and I had our shopping trip yesterday. Since her granddaughter was 6, Ruth had taken her shopping for her birthday in July. 16 years now. A brief silence. You overdid it, didn't you? Merci shouldn't have. I made the appointment. Don't blame your daughter. Well, she shouldn't have kept you out all day. She hadn't. They had gone to exactly 3 stores and hardly browsed the sales racks as they usually did. Ruth wished she could return to the days of shopping for hours and watching her granddaughter try on clothes. Now that Merci worked in her favorite clothing boutique, she knew exactly what she wanted and the size she needed. We shopped for less than 2 hours and then spent nearly that much time having lunch. I hope you're taking it easy today. Ruth's body wasn't giving her another option. Enough about me. I called because we came up with this fantastic idea yesterday at lunch. Okay, a stretch of silence. I'd love to hear about it. Merci and I were discussing the fun times we have together, and I mentioned one of my favorite places was Victoria, BC, and she hasn't been there. 2 months ago, Ruth had watched Mercedes walk across the stage at her Bible college to be awarded a diploma in psychology, but Ruth had been too sick to take her granddaughter on the graduation trip she'd promised. She really hated breaking a promise, especially to her grandchildren. That's the place with that garden you love. Butchart Gardens, Ruth nodded, and her lips relaxed into a smile. And I said it would be great to take a girls' trip there. She swallowed. Darn this dry mouth. And she thought it would. Ruth reached for the nearby water bottle, finding it nearly empty. She swooshed the warm, stale water around in her mouth. A girls' trip. She hated the robotic tone of her daughter's voice. Lacey had always packed her emotions away, but since she'd left her husband at the first of the year, it had been worse. Exponentially. Ruth swallowed the water. You, Merci, me, and Krista. Lacey's laugh was short and mirthless. She's too busy with school. And although that reference could have applied to both Merci and Krista, Ruth understood it was a cut at her other daughter. This would be after she finished next May. Lacey's indrawn breath was louder than the rest of the conversation. That's a year from now, Mom. You might not be alive. Ruth clenched her teeth at the unspoken but inferred implication. She would not bow to cancer before seeing this through. I'm not giving up. That transplant is supposed to get me 5 good years. Not that her energy had returned, as the oncologist had promised. More than a year after the stem cell transplant, a procedure that nearly killed her, her bone marrow still couldn't produce healthy blood cells. Of course you're not giving up. Lacey sounded offended at the thought. But a lot can happen in a year. Which is why we need to get this on the calendar. Lacey sighed. What are you thinking? Enthusiasm welled in Ruth as she explained about the condominiums in Victoria. They could drive to Port Angeles and take a ferry across the Sound, so they'd have a car to get to Butchart Gardens. She closed her eyes, envisioning the acres of roses. How she loved roses. So the first week of August. Lacey sounded interested. What do you think? I can plan my classes around it. Lacey had enrolled in a program to earn a nutritionist certificate, something that paired well with her personal trainer credentials. Won't you be done by then? Maybe. I might have to take a fewer classes in the fall if I can't figure out financial aid. Ruth opened her mouth to offer her daughter the money and then shut it again. Lacey needed to be independent. Her marriage had destroyed her self-esteem, and Ruth believed if her daughter could accomplish this new goal on her own, it would resurrect her confidence. Wonderful. I'll make the reservations. Don't hold your breath about Krista. Bitterness made her daughter's words bite. Ruth straightened her spine. The sour tone confirmed that if she was ever to see her girls let go of their feud, this trip needed to happen. Ruth feared their falling out had something to do with Lacey's divorce, but that seemed unlikely since Krista had been advising Lacey to leave the marriage for several years. Not that any of them believed in divorce. After Lacey walked out, she had stayed at our sister's home for a month until she found an apartment near her place of employment. I don't hold my breath. Ruth sounded as stiff as she felt, and I don't know why she wouldn't want to come. Lacey muttered something that Ruth ignored because she worried it would discourage her. After they said their goodbyes, she trundled into the kitchen with her water bottle. Her mouth tasted like plastic from the stale drink she'd been forced to take. After she guzzled half a glass of water, she rinsed and refilled her bottle and made a pit stop in the restroom before settling into her desk chair again. That trip through the house had been easier. Yes, her legs still trembled, but she hadn't been dizzy. Once she finished the second call and made the reservation, she'd lie down for a nap. She sighed at the thought, but refused to berate herself. The life of a cancer survivor involved multiple daily naps. Even though the constant fatigue drained her, she could keep a positive attitude. Lord, I'm convinced this trip is what you want. Help me be wise as I deal with this situation. She dialed her youngest daughter, unsure whether she'd catch her at home since Krista usually attended college classes on Saturdays. Her son-in-law answered the phone. She loved him. Krista had made a great match with Todd. She has class until 3. I'll have her call when she gets home, he told her. They chatted for a few minutes, and to her delight, he didn't ask how she was feeling. Once she hung up, she made the reservations. Lord, this is my act of faith. I believe you're going to work it out so my girls can go to Canada and recover their friendship. She slept through lunch. Dale woke her when he returned from puttering at the parsonage. Since they'd retired, they spent at least 1 day per week gardening for their church. It had been one activity she'd continued through the first and second rounds of chemo, but now it made her skeleton ache. He shook her shoulder softly before planting a cool kiss on her cheek. You didn't eat. While she roused herself and brushed her short hair, he made lunch. She nibbled at the half sandwich and polished off the bowl of chicken and vegetable soup. Across the narrow table, he sipped a cup of coffee and filled her in on the work progress. After washing the soup pan and loading her dishes into the dishwasher, he headed to the garage to put his tools away. Back at her desk, she had her computer read scripture aloud while she played several games of spider solitaire. Of the many things she'd had to give up, she missed reading and gardening the most. Since she couldn't concentrate well enough to read print, she'd learned to appreciate audiobooks. It was close to 3:30 when the phone rang. She picked up the receiver with a brief prayer on her lips. Hello? Mom, hi. Todd said I missed your call. Ruth nestled the phone closer. I thought you might be in class, but I wanted to call while I was thinking about it. Krista hummed in agreement. What were you thinking about? Well, no preliminary questions about her health. Warmth spilled into her stomach, and she chose to accept the immediate interest as a positive omen. Merci and I had our annual shopping trip yesterday. She went on to describe it without any interruptions from Krista. So what's this great plan you two cooked up? She could almost hear the smile in her daughter's voice. It involves the four of us girls traveling together. A brief pause. Traveling where? Lord, give her an open mind. Don't let Lacey be right about this. After she swallowed a sip of water, she said, Victoria, BC. Krista gasped. I would love to go there. Do you think we could do the high tea you told us about? Ruth smiled, cast her eyes heavenward, and relaxed into her chair. Most definitely. We'll have to wear hats for the occasion. Krista groaned. Not a hat, Mom. I can't wear hats. You most certainly can wear hats. Ruth's lips twitched at this old argument. Krista wore baseball caps on rare occasions and stocking caps in the winter when weather required it. Otherwise, she hated wearing anything on her head. You look fantastic in hats. I look ridiculous. Pshaw. Ruth sipped her water. I'm not going to argue with you about it. Krista huffed, her sign of capitulation. I've got class until the middle of August and then a couple of weeks off before the next phase of courses begin. I'm finally getting into the student teaching portion. Her joy and energy played in stark contrast to Lacey's lack of enthusiasm. It looks like I've been approved to work with the language arts teacher at our high school. Wonderful news. Ruth cleared a sudden lump in her throat. This trip is the first week of August next year. Next year? Silence buzzed between them. Yes, and you'll be done by then, graduated, licensed, and employed, I'm sure. I hope, Krista sighed. The first week of August is before the school year starts. She heard the rumble of a male voice. Krista must have covered the receiver because all went quiet. Ruth's spotted, wrinkled fingers tapped the water bottle. The sight of her hand reminded her she truly was getting old, but as Dale always said, it was better than the alternative. When the pain burned through her bones, Ruth didn't agree. Heaven meant the end of pain, but she was adamant that her girls were reconciled first. Todd says I should definitely go and take notes on what he needs to see when we go in a few years. Todd's a smart man. Generous, kind. Krista grunted playfully. You always did love him better than me. It was an old joke. Except Ruth didn't think it was funny, especially since she suspected her youngest daughter truly believed her words. Ruth raised her chin. I'm not taking him to Victoria, so I think that settles the issue. After a brief pause, Krista asked. Lacey agreed to this. Why wouldn't she? And she knows you're inviting me? Ruth closed her eyes and relaxed into the headrest of her office chair. A deep ache bloomed in her chest. She would not permit this estrangement. Family stood together. Yes, she's excited to see the gardens, and she'll love the tea too. A wave of fatigue blinded her. Ruth should ask Krista what this disagreement was about, but not today. Not with her body betraying her as if she hadn't taken one nap already. After a moment, her daughter said in a more subdued tone, I'm looking forward to it, Mom. This is a great idea. I think so too. After assuring each other they'd talk at church the next day, Ruth hung up the phone. If she couldn't get her daughters back together before then, Operation Victoria Girls Trip would provide ample time and a perfect atmosphere. She sipped water, gazing over the wall of photographs, recalling the lifetime they represented. With her mission accomplished for the day, she allowed her mind to rest.